To say that the last few years have been a whirlwind would be an understatement. The Anglo-Ottoman War, now in some form behind us, has given us control over northern Egypt and Cairo, Alexandria, and the northern part of the Nile, as well as full control over the Suez Canal. Although its entry points on the south side into the Red Sea are still not fully under British control, as southern Egypt is still technically under Ottoman rule. The war also granted us the Holy Land, and immediately people are having to sort out years and centuries-long tensions between the various religious and ethnic groups. Politics isn't my style. I'm a Navy man, and that is my job. I found myself reassigned in 1902 back to the home squadron after the Thailand incident was over and done with, and Thailand was folded into the Commonwealth. Admiral Fisher said he wanted my input on cruiser operations, especially after the various failures during the Ottoman War that saw multiple light cruisers sank for little more than paltry gains, as he put it. I challenged him on his characterization of the war. Striking down over a dozen, and almost 24 ships for the loss of only 6 of our own, was a great victory, considering that most of the ships we lost were not all that important. He shook his head and informed me that one of the battleships was sunk, well, rather had to be beached and could not be salvaged, or at least put back into service. The steel would be salvaged and all useful parts would be recycled as best we can. No point in us trying to put together a battleship that barely made itself into the shallows enough to beach itself like a whale. Thankfully, we have other alternatives. But what struck me most of all was a meeting I had a few days later. Well, I say days, it feels like days, but truthfully it's been years. I've been so busy I haven't had much time to think. I was called into London one day, after being reassigned to the Home Fleet, and taken into a dark corner of the Admiralty building. In there were various admirals and Admiral Fisher. He then said to me, "Son, I'm about to show you the next generation of warship." He unfolded a large blueprint and design drawings, put out models on a table, and he said, "Captain, allow me to introduce to you the next warship. For hundreds of years, man has fought on the seas with sail and cannon. Then the iron ships, then the steel. This one is to be the next iteration. Ships of the line were great in the time of Napoleon and Nelson, or even in the time of the American Revolution. But they're slow. Many cannons can do lots of damage, but it's no matter if you can barely hold your own. Smaller ships can get up close because the ships can't turn, which is why we pack secondary and tertiary armaments on all of our battleships instead. What if we designed the ship on all big guns? No messing about with thousands of smaller calibers or weapons and relying on a single or 2 cannons. How about 5 large 12-inch guns in dual turrets able to shred enemies up to 15,000 meters away? What if the battleship is designed to do that? Battle other battleships, battle large ships. It doesn't need to be an all-around ship. It doesn't need to be able to take on 1,000 enemies. It just needs to be able to hit its target. He informed me that this new class would be called Dreadnought. He said that all ships that come before it will be known as pre-dreadnoughts, because Dreadnought is in a class of her own. He then informed me that, although I wouldn't be captaining one, I'm the first enlisted man below the rank of Admiral to see the designs. Truthfully, I was a bit shocked. The design was practical. Stunning, even. Brilliant. The question then came to me about why he was letting me, of all the captains in the Royal Navy, the youngest one who had recently just gotten married, had his first son, and now was basically almost, 30, and why was he showing me, of all the people in the world? Why me? He simply chuckled, and he said, "Son, I'm showing you it because you're going to be commanding the light cruisers that will escort this ship. I'm promoting you to a senior captain, and you will lead the cruiser fleet, guarding the ship. Only the light cruisers for now," he said, "but, given time, perhaps we can move you up to a heavy cruiser." And so with that, he and I sat and talked about the design, went over the models, design drawings. And then he asked me to go back to my roots of design at the Naval College and experiment with some light cruiser designs. Some ideas had been drawn up by the Admiralty Design Board, and he wanted me to look at them, give my opinion as someone who commanded a cruiser. I gave my opinions, and with that he dismissed me. And while I was in London, I was given permission to catch up with Angus, my cousin. Admiral Fisher did invite him to also look at the dreadnought, although he politely declined, stating that he was too busy fighting the army over something, and, well, frankly, Admiral Fisher had to step in between him and the army before he got himself sacked. After Angus got a chance to look at dreadnought, he and I sat in a cafe. He talked for some time about the amphibious failures in various operations. He complained to me that the Navy, of all the branches, had been the most stubborn, citing that, well, we have the Royal Marines, we don't need the Army getting involved in amphibious operations. But they did begrudgingly admit that Angus was right, that many of the failures that we encountered, especially around Alexandria during the landings, were a direct result of the Navy and Army branches fighting. So it looks like his little pet project is going to keep going forward. But Angus then asked me a question. He brought about an idea, a thought problem, if you will, talking about innovation. He said, "William, Will, tell me this. When something comes onto the battlefield that fundamentally changes the entirety of warfare, not even just warfare, let's say a new technology, the steam engine, right? It's very efficient, cheap to produce nowadays that we have manufacturing technology, powers everything. It fundamentally changes the game. No more do you need the water wheel, the windmill. It changes everything. Now, in order to compete, you need to just have more than the other person. When the gun, especially loading rifles like bolt-action rifles, came onto the field, muskets were immediately made obsolete. Even sliding block loading guns were made obsolete immediately. Internal magazines made so many other weapons obsolete immediately, and the only way to win was just to make sure you had either better rifles or more of them than the enemy." And he kind of tapped his finger nervously, something I don't see him do often, and he said, "What if Dreadnought changes the game? It's going to. But if Britain only has, let's say, 4 dreadnoughts, we have command of the sea. But what happens if a nation like France, who's been building her what will be called pre-dreadnought classes, suddenly decides to build 10 dreadnoughts? Well then, effectively, they'd rule the seas. What happens if this dreadnought project is about to kick off something akin to the greatest arms race in naval and perhaps military history?" He said, Do you think that the Royal Navy, despite all of the measures we've taken to balance the budget and keep the Navy from going over cost limits, for the most part, is the British government, more accurately the British people, the Empire, willing to sacrifice so much to just have more dreadnoughts than the other person? Because, let's say, all of Europe did not have alliances. Well, whoever has the most dreadnoughts can beat Britain on the sea. At least on paper. He said, privately, quietly so no one else can hear, "This will be known as the dreadnought effect. I tell you this with certainty, that in the future historians will look at this moment, perhaps not this conversation, but this very moment in history, when Admiral Jackie Fisher will go out, when dreadnought is launched down the docks, she's fitted out and sailed around Britain in a grand show of glory, that her construction, because it fundamentally changed the game, kick-started a wave of innovation and arms race that the world has never seen. And Will, you and I have front row seats. I imagine that for the rest of our lives, the dreadnought will remain the battleship. No more of the pre-dreadnoughts will be built, except by those nations who can simply not afford a dreadnought or do not have need for such a weapon, but those that wish to command the sea, have a place on the world stage, who wish to be a great power, they only need one more dreadnought than the British Navy. And if that happens, I fear it could start a firestorm like no one's ever seen. Because Europe and the world, truthfully, has always been a powder keg. Bismarck was right. The leaders are men smoking in an arsenal, and we've just introduced a new heavy type of explosive into the mix with a dreadnought. I pray to God this doesn't backfire on us.